I'm talking to Colleen Johnson, who's a teacher, member of the NEU, is on their executive committee representing disabled education workers. So, Colleen, tell us a bit about yourself, successes and barriers you have faced as a disabled teacher.
Hi, Richard. My name is Colleen Johnson, and I'm a primary school teacher, and I work part-time in school, and I work right across Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. I'm currently based in Worcester, but I taught for a long time in inner city Birmingham. Successes, I was Key Stage 2 lead and maths lead for school. I'm the seat holder for disabled members on the National Executive of the National Education Union and a member of the TUC Disabled Workers Committee. Barriers that I've come across, entering the profession, wondering if I'd be accepted by colleagues and by pupils and parents, staying in the profession and being promoted within the profession. And these are barriers which I've always challenged. There are barriers caused by the school environment, of course, but the biggest barriers have always been people's attitudes, either either of limited expectations or that I could easily be pushed aside. I find some pupils' attitudes are really good regards limb difference, but others I still find tricky. There you go.
Okay, so why do you think it's important to have disabled teachers in the classroom alongside other teachers?
I think it's important for pupils, and I think it's important for parents and for colleagues to stress what disabled people can achieve, to prove that we're not all the same, and that a diverse group relating to society in general really is the answer, and not to be a separate group, to be part of that teaching force. And
is there any particular, you mentioned barriers that are held you back, are there any specific barriers that apply to disabled teachers in the UK, do you think, or in England?
I mean, it's really difficult, isn't it? It's, well, workload and insufficient pay for starters. It's a very intense environment. You know, sickness, absence monitoring can be terribly discriminatory. If there's no disability leave policy in place, especially, and too often disabled educators go on to have their capability questioned, and the profession needs to be rethought, really. I'm not surprised that there's a huge recruitment and retention crisis, as it's not good at the minute for anyone's work-life balance and mental health, but particularly disabled people.
All right. What can and what is the NUT, and sorry, the NEU was the NUT, but the NEU doing to challenge these barriers?
The NEU is doing a lot to challenge those barriers. All casework now goes through a process for picking up possible discrimination due to protected characteristics. And we know that a large amount of casework is linked to this type of discrimination. And
can you describe what you mean by casework to people who maybe don't know about?
Yeah, so casework is an individualised thing where there is a difficulty at work, and the member goes to their rep, and it creates like a complaint, really. That's probably the simplest way of explaining it. So we know that a large amount of casework is linked to disability, really, and linked to that kind of discrimination. And along with members, the NEU has developed the Disability Equality Toolkit, which highlights things like reasonable adjustment passports, access to work, and collectivising in workplaces as much as possible around disabled members' issues and around any equality issues.
So collectivising, that means involving their colleagues to fight for justice for them, even though it might be an individual case. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, collectivising could be on pay, it could be on workload, it could be on difficult management, but and equally so, it could be around something like not having a disability leave policy or having something that's unfair. For example, the same targets for sickness absence.
Right. Just while we're still on teachers, I mean, I seem to remember there's still a barrier in England, which isn't in Scotland and Wales. Maybe I'll mention this later on, but fitness to teach, is that still an issue that the NEU would like to see got rid of? And what would you like to see in its place?
I mean, it is a discussion that I've had. It is, you know, I don't think it's a particularly, I think it's less of an issue now that the union sort of been concerned about, you know, getting rid of it. But, you know, we raised that issue. And I mean, it would be good to see it replaced with a competency model. If you can teach, you teach. And there's not this kind of, you know, superhuman kind of barrier that you have to be, you know, amazing. That, yeah.
All right. Well, so we've said why it's important, because it promotes diversity and understanding of difference, to have a wide range of people, including disabled staff, in the classroom. The government's currently carrying out a curriculum review, but I don't think that disability features particularly highly in that. Do you think it should, and why should it be there?
Well, I mean, regarding the curriculum review, there's a lot really that needs to be considered. And I'm concerned that ordinary educators and trade unions have been locked out of this review. There's too many MAT CEOs have been included, and that's a huge worry. It's so important to address the mental health crisis within our young people at the minute. We desperately need more art, music, drama, poetry, and dance. These are the subjects that children love. And the overfocus on maths and English has been particularly unfair on our SEND pupils. One of the things that we're working on at the moment regards disability equality, Richard, we're working on an accessible transport resource based around the DAN protests. So we're working on something around disabled people's history.
That's good. Right. And that when's that going to be up on? Will that be up for History Month on your website, I think?
That's in process at the minute. I'll let you know when it's near completion, if I may.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me that if we only promote normal, whatever that is, normal bodies and minds, and not look at the diversity of impairment, which has always been with us, it's been there as long as there have been human beings, then we're really letting down children and future parents and adults, because it will then be a shock to them almost that these things can happen to them. Whereas if we build it in the education at the beginning, how do you think you could do that? I mean, I know you've done some work on that when you were in your primary school. Do you want to give us a few ideas how you might do it?
Yeah, I mean, I've done projects with young people before where I've interviewed them before I've done a project, and then I've done a project with a colleague, and we've done lots and lots of, we've overtly taught the social model, and children seem to get to grips with it really well. We've looked at buildings, we've looked at history, we've looked at famous disabled people, we've looked at language. You know, a lot of that work actually stemmed out of disability equality, in the classroom, a human rights issue. So thank you for that, Richard. You know, so yeah, and I've re-interviewed the children at the end, and I always remember what somebody called Jonathan said. He said, there's really important stuff we've learned, and how would we have known that if we hadn't have been taught it? So, which completely vindicates what you're saying.
Yeah, but I think, do you think there's a need for the union to sort of take the curriculum out to its rank and file members to get their views so that they can feed that into this curriculum review?
As I say, our main worry is that MAT CEOs have got, you know, they're at the table. You know, why aren't ordinary educators and trade unions at the table at the minute? And the biggest thing I think is, and I'm not saying that that's not important, it absolutely is, Richard, you know me very well, but this imbalance within the curriculum of the creative subjects not being there is absolutely awful, in terms of, you know, the kind of subjects that made people skip into school. It was the thing that got them there, you know, and it's not given any importance at the moment.
I don't know if you heard Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister's speech today at Labour Party conference, but he spent about 5 minutes saying why it was important for all young people to have access to that. So maybe that is something the unions can build on to push this.
I think particularly for SEND youngsters.
Yes, and I think he mentioned that. He mentioned that he had a SEND brother and he didn't do very well, and his dad always said, as far as I'm concerned, he's achieving as much as you are. He's just doing it in a different way, which I thought was quite nice. So what are the guiding principles really for organising NEU disabled members? How does it work? Is there a structure in the union? How does it work?
Okay. So, as you know, Richard, I'm the seat holder for disabled members on the National Executive, and I'm democratically elected by all of the disabled members within the National Education Union. And we have our organising forum with members elected now by their regional constituencies, and they organise events locally to support and engage disabled members. And the minutes from the off meetings, when we get together and we talk about different things, including what we've done, the minutes from those off meetings go to the National Executive via the Equality Committee. We have our annual Disabled Members Conference, where delegates meet from around England's Wales and Northern Ireland, and as well as workshops and panels. And, you know, we have debates, as well as workshops, panels and guest speakers. We also have debates and choose a motion to go to annual conference. There's a chance to go to other conferences too from that conference.
And in your experience, does that draw quite a lot of interest from members, all of that activity?
It does, but I always say that the Disabled Members Organising Forum, you've got to remember that these are people who are managing their impairments, and they are, you know, in school as well. So you have to be aware that it's not quite like the other organising forums, which are mainly non-disabled people. So I often remind people of that. And it's a good space. It's a really supportive place. It's a really interesting place. And, you know, some people, they really bounce on from that conference, you know, via you know, maybe an organising forum place into, you know, being something in their district, whether it's an equality officer. You know, we have had some district secretaries go through that process as well. So for some people, it's just absolutely what they need. And for some people, it's like they'll get there a bit later on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, one of the things because I'm also, I should declare, a NEU member and was NUT before, that I've noticed that you've prioritised for the union understanding of the social model. Why do you think that's so important?
Well, I do. I mean, one of the things that you had down on your pad or my pad to ask me about was the guiding principles of, you know, how we organise within the NEU, how we organise disabled members. And I'd say number one is the social model of disability, that it's not medical, it's not charity, you know, so we don't want pity, we don't want your admiration, we don't want your handouts, we want disabled people's rights. And we don't want to be medicalised into different impairment groups. We want to be together, supporting each other against the barriers out there in society. So, you know, that's a very strongly held belief. You know, we also prioritise, linked to that, solidarity between disabled people and inclusion, especially in terms of universal accessibility. So those are the type of things that we prioritise.
So this is all quite different to 25, 30 years ago.
Right.
They've changed a lot.
Do you want me first to talk about
Yes, well, no,
TUC disabled workers?
because you mentioned at the beginning you're also involved with the TUC, Disabled Workers Committee, and they have conferences, and in fact you were just at the Congress as well. So tell us about the wider trade union movement and your involvement there, and why, you know, disability is important in that movement.
Okay. So delegates are elected at TUC Disabled Workers Conference from a wide variety of unions. For example, you'll come across musicians and journalists, and it's really interesting to hear about disabled workers in other professions. It's just, you know, it's just always really interesting. We organise, the committee, TUC Disabled Workers Committee, organise the TUC Disabled Workers Conference, and we monitor the progress of the motions that are passed through that conference. Essentially one prioritised motion goes through to Congress, which we've just had this September. This year it was a motion on improving the process for PIP, which Unite moved and the NEU seconded, so I got to speak on that.
Personal independent payment.
It is, yes, thank you. We also highlight certain issues, for example, the disability pay gap, Disability History Month, the UN International Day of Persons with Disabilities. I get to speak regularly at events representing NEU disabled members on, you know, TUC events. And recently I was elected to the TUC General Council as an NEU member too.
Okay, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So some people, quite a lot of people viewing this, particularly disabled people who've never been in regular work and so on, why do you think unions are important for disabled people to join?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, this is something that I'm going to touch on in my next answer, I think. You know, work needs to be rethought in terms of flexible work and part-time work. And, you know, I think for some people there'll always be that element of needing some support from the government, and the overemphasis of the word working people bothers me. It does. Anyway, ask me your last question, Richard, and I'll further develop that point, if I may.
Well, the one I want to ask was about the changes. Yes.
Yeah.
Things have changed a lot. I mean, I remember, well, I don't think you were even teaching when I first started campaigning on this, but it was quite a long road, and nobody seemed to think it was necessary to organise disabled people. That was really a personal issue, and you dealt with it. We've come a long way since then, partly because of, you know, seeing the social model. But what do you think are the other things that have made this change happen?
So, you know, in the last 25 years, we've had the Disability Discrimination Act, that's helped, and the Equality Act also, I suppose, making disability a protected characteristic and promoting the right for reasonable adjustments in the workplace. And something called the Public Sector Equality Duty 2, which I know you're very keen on, and that's all about access and the use of public money. So that's really important. What still needs to change, I think, in education, much better funding is essential to make a truly inclusive system that is well resourced. Our profession too, in terms of reducing the toxic workload and the accountability structure. I'm concerned about the overemphasis on working people by politicians too. We need to realise that some disabled people will always need some degree of support from the government, and that's okay. We need to be aware of the far right at the minute, because we know that when disabled people are labelled as scroungers and loungers, that hate speech and hate crime will follow.
Yeah. I mean, despite all of this work, in schools, disabled kids, particularly you know, those with mental health and other issues, neurodiverse, are still the main target of bullying. And do you think that leads us back to the issue of the curriculum? Maybe if it was more in the curriculum and more open about it, that might help to challenge that. What are your thoughts on the bullying of disabled students?
I mean, I just think that one thing is reporting, you know, when you're in school, and if there's a racist incident, it has to be reported. And I've always led the way on recording disableist bullying, whether it's between pupils, whether it's aimed at a member of staff. It's serious. It shouldn't be just swept to one side. The time and the space for classes to gel, you know, to value everybody and their different skills, rather than this intense, you know, sometimes almost Victorian, sitting in rows drilling. It doesn't help. But yeah, I mean, you know, as children progress through school, they should learn more and more about diversity, absolutely, and the value of, you know, each and every member of their class and their school. You know, but at the minute, there is just this worrying focus on phonics, English and maths. And it needs to change, because our pupils, many of them, are struggling with it. They are struggling with feeling comfortable and confident and happy at school. And we've got a significant number of SEND pupils who are school refusing, and they're not doing that on a whim. They're not wagging school. It's not good.
No, so I suppose you'd agree then that the previous government's policies, and maybe even the previous government before that, the New Labour one in their later years, have created a climate in schools which is not pro-inclusion. It's not inclusive of everyone. It's more about sieving out the sort of the meritocracy rather than education for all. It's not a comprehensive education anymore. So
it's shocking. I mean, you know, you've explained it very well. It's an atmosphere, an ethos where, you know, you achieve this, you know, this expected grade, or you're a problem. And I think it makes children very unhappy, and it makes educators very unhappy too. And by educators, I mean, you know, teachers, TAs, anybody that works in school. It makes them very unhappy to see children sort of in this sort of process, in this like factory, you know, put in one end and churned out the other with XYZ grades. It's not really what education should be about.
That needs more than getting rid of one-word judgments from Ofsted, which is what the government is claiming at the moment will change things.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the biggest thing, perhaps the best thing we can say about all of this is the recruitment and retention crisis means they have to look again at disabled educators. We went to see Nick Gibb a while ago, and we spoke to him about why his adverts don't show disabled educators, and you know, we still didn't get the adverts. Well, actually, you know, you create a job that is more accessible, with a bit of flexible working, that's not, you know, toxic, and you'll have, I'm sure, many more educators interested in being, you know, disabled people being interested in education.
Right. So one last question. There'll be quite a lot of students watching this, and lots of disabled students, not just those with physical impairments like you and me, but also those with mental health issues, those with cognitive issues, those with neurodiverse issues. What would you say to them to why they should persevere and enter the teaching profession?
Right. This is a really good question. Thank you, Richard. So when I sort of finished my degree, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew what I didn't want to do. I knew I didn't want to go into banking or insurance. So I knew basically I wanted to work with people. And when I went along for the interview, for teacher training, as it was then, I wasn't sure if I could crack it, you know. I'd got into a lot of trouble growing up. People had stared at me a lot and I'd stared back and nearly got a sort of, you know, almost got into fights really, because I thought, you're going to stare at me, I'm going to give it back. And so I was very apprehensive. And then I saw somebody who had a facial difference, quite a significant facial difference in the education block. And I thought, if that woman can do that, then I can do it. And don't be put off. When I asked the teachers there whether they thought I could be a teacher, they said, well, only you know that. And I thought, that's not really what I need to hear. So take it from a disabled educator, take it from a disabled teacher. We need you because it's a lovely career. It really is. You can change lives. The number of parents who've spoken to me, children who've spoken to me and have said, you understand, you get it. And that's without me even having a conversation with them. The fact that I'm there speaks volumes to them. And you will have people that make assumptions about you, and don't get perturbed about that. Just be yourself, work hard, and I think you'll crack it. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Colleen, for some very interesting points, which I think gives everyone pause for thought.